Hello everyone and welcome to All Things Watched. In this video we are going to talk about episode 2 of season 2 of the brand new MCU project What If, and this episode is titled What If Peter Quill Attacked Earth's Mightiest Heroes. And so the episode opens with this meteorite coming down over New York City and specifically Manhattan. And of course, when the meteor or spaceship actually lands, we learn that it is actually New York City, 1988. And of course, then when the spaceship lands, the door of the spaceship ends up opening up, and we learn that it is actually Peter Quill or Star-Lord. And of course, in this situation, he is actually a child, which is very interesting because I really thought going into this one that I really wasn't expecting it, because I have been going into each of these episodes not reading the title, so I never really know what these episodes are going to be about. And of course, when I seen the kid come out, as soon as I seen the kid, I knew that this was Peter Quill, because the spaceship was very reminiscent to Ego's spaceships in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but I was not expecting Peter Quill to be a child, so I guess that's why, obviously he lands in 1988, which also makes me wonder, when was he actually abducted, or was he abducted at all? Maybe in this scenario, in this reality, in this universe, maybe he was actually born with Ego, or maybe his mom is still alive or something like that. But that theory goes quickly out the window, because as soon as this scene comes, the openings come, the opening credits, and then we see the true story, which is actually something I've been really liking about season 2 of What If. They give you sort of this little, they sort of show you the premise of the story, then they give you the opening credits, which is all about the multiverse, with the with the Watcher actually speaking, follow me, come with me, and ponder, the question, what if? And then right after the opening sequence, then they'll actually set up the world and tell you what happened, and then the story goes from there. So we get the opening sequence, and then we learn that Peter Quill was in fact still abducted, but this time when he was abducted, rather than Yandu sort of having a soft heart for him and feeling bad, rather than Yandu actually caring for him and taking him in on his own, knowing that his father was such a evil person, or such an evil celestial being, rather than raising him, he goes ahead and hands him over to Ego, and Ego starts to train him right away, right from the very get-go. And it was a really cool scene here. It shows, because we have Quill with his little headset, and we know how much music means to Peter Quill, and so that was really cool to see that. And then of course we have Ego, he takes that little piece of technology and sort of turns it into like this energy ball, and then him and Peter are passing it back and forth. So he ends up training him at a very young age. So anyways, then after we get that opening sequence, it comes back then to Earth, and we see Peggy here and Howard Stark, of course, which is Iron Man's dad. And it's really interesting here is that it says Shield Western Division Headquarters, and of course this is Project Pegasus. And a part of me wondered if them putting Shield Western Division here could be a little bit of a nod, or a little bit of a timbit, or maybe even an Easter egg to what could eventually become the East Coast Avengers, because we know that eventually there's going to be so many superheroes, if they keep expanding at the rate that they're expanding Marvel, to keep introducing a whole whackload of new heroes, then of course eventually you're going to start having different teams. You'll probably have the West Coast Avengers, the East Coast Avengers. We already know that the X-Men are coming, the Fantastic Four. They already have enough characters introduced where they could do a Midnight Suns. They can have Daredevil, Punisher, Moon Knight if they wanted to. They could even switch it up. They could put Doctor Strange in there. They could put Peter Parker in there if they really wanted to, even though Parker is not really a part of the Midnight Suns. It doesn't mean that they can't throw him in there anyways, just for the sake of putting him there. So there's really endless possibilities as to what they could do. But a part of me wondered when I seen this, when it said Western Division, it just made me think about the West Coast Avengers. And so then once once Peggy and Howard realize what's going on, then of course they realize that they need help, and so they reach out to I guess one of Peggy's friends, but not so much of a friend of Stark, and they end up reaching out to Hank Pym. And so I really thought it was cool to see Hank Pym here in a younger version of himself. This is Hank Pym from the 80s, so he's still very active. He's still very much Ant-Man, which is really cool because we never actually seen the original Ant-Man in the MCU. We've always only seen Scott Lang, which is really sort of like the second Ant-Man. It's sort of like he sort of Hank Pym sort of carries the baton and then passes it down to Scott Lang. And in the regular 616 MCU universe, which is the one that we've been following the entire time, we never actually see Hank Pym as Ant-Man other than in a couple of flashbacks, so it's really cool that we got an episode with him actually as Ant-Man for the entire time. And he sat down here and they have a really cool banter here with his daughter. Of course, this is Hope Van Dyne, so this would eventually become the character that would grow up and fall in love with Scott Lang and whatnot. And so you could really feel that tension between him and Howard even when he answers the phone. At first he doesn't really want to answer the phone, but he does anyways, just because he despite the dispute that he has with Howard, they're still not enemies to the point where they would want anything to happen to the Earth. So kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so to speak. And so he ends up picking up the phone, and him and Hope ends up going into the base, and then Peggy ends up, basically meeting him and introducing him to this character, which I believe was titled Dr. Bill Foster. Now, in the comics, I believe he's known as Goliath or Giant Man. And I think they even, in earlier iterations, they even refer to him as Big Goliath or Black Goliath or something like that. But essentially, if for anyone that's not familiar with that character, in the comics, he basically has the same ability, or half of the abilities that Ant-Man has, because Ant-Man is sort of able to go up and down. He can shrink in size, but he can also, go up in size and become Giant Man. Whereas this gentleman, Bill Foster, he is only able to go up in size. He can't shrink, but he still uses a formula from Hank Pym. He still uses Pym particles. I can't quite remember why he ended up with Pym particles in the comics. I can't quite remember his origin story, but I do know that he uses the Pym particles, and it's sort of like the Pym particles combined with technology allows him to become gigantic and allows him to become Goliath. I thought it would have been really interesting if in this episode they had have allowed both Bill and Hank to go to become giant, but I guess in this universe, just for the sake of not confusing anyone, in case someone's not familiar with the comics or not familiar with the characters, they just basically left Ant-Man as being Ant-Man. He only shrinks in this episode, and Goliath, he only goes big. But now, having said that, how they use his powers I thought was really cool, and I thought it was also really cool that they introduced him here, so there's no reason why eventually he couldn't be in the actual real MCU. That'd be really cool to see him actually join the Avengers or be on the Avengers. But anyways, we end up getting introduced to him here. Him and Hank meets, and of course we have Peggy, and then we have a really cool, dark, sinister scene, because we also learn that because of this new threat, this extraordinary extraterrestrial threat, or this celestial threat, of course, which is Peter Quill, they really need some serious backup, and they need to use as many superpowered people as they can. So they end up getting in contact with, I think they say, Russia, and of course they end up getting their hands on Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier. And this is when Bucky is in his prime. This is when he's super strong and super evil. He was actually the only thing about this episode that I probably didn't like. I did feel like he was the weakest part of this episode, because I just feel like they didn't utilize him enough, they didn't use him enough, and he wasn't really in the episode enough, at least, in a way that actually mattered. They did throw him in here and give him somewhat of a character arc, so I understand why they put him there, but I just wish they had have done a little bit more with him. And so then Peggy ends up taking the team and leading them out to the spaceship, because they're now going to get ready to go on to this mission to try to stop Peter Quill. And then now we see pretty well the entire team except one. But as you can see, the lineup here, we got Peggy, we got Howard, we got Hank, who's also known as Ant-Man, we got Bill Foster, who's known as Goliath or Giant Man. Then we have the Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, and then we have Takacha, I believe is what his name is, who's of course Black Panther, and so it was really cool to see excuse me, to see all those characters come together, and it's really cool to see them working together and coming together, because this is a team I think that you would only actually see King T'Chaka, yeah, and so it was really cool to see this team come together in What If. And just as they're heading towards the plane, then they're introduced to the final member of the team, which is of course Wendy. What's her name? Wendy Larson, I believe her name is. Wendy Lassen, who is of course the original Captain Marvel, which of course is who Brie Larson's Captain Marvel is sort of inspired by. She really likes this version of Captain Marvel, and so this is the team in its entirety. And they then get on the ship, and there's a little bit of a funny banter there between them all. We have, I think it was Hank, who was talking about each of their abilities, and he's kind of laughing at them all. He's like, we have a Catman, we have an Ant-Man, we have, and it's just really funny hearing him sort of making fun of the team. And so the team rides out, and we have some really cool scenery here. I really loved the animation, and I really loved the direction of the episode. So the camera angles, what they use here. How we see Goliath or Gigantic Man over here. You can see how tall he is compared to the horizon. And at first, I actually thought that this was Ant-Man on the roof, but it's actually Black Panther's King T'Chaka. And so the team is basically heading towards this amusement park because Peter Quill is only a child, and this is where he is, this is where he's hanging out, this is where he wants to be. He wants to be around all these rides and games, and just like any child would, because remember, Peter Quill is still half human. He's not complete celestial, he is still half human. And so they end up following him here, and they end up having a scrimmage, and they fight the child, and they end up sending him into this, I don't know what you would call it, into this sort of like house that's like a maze of mirrors type thing, and they have it rigged up where it's full of lasers. And I thought that was a little interesting as well, the fact that they set it up with lasers, because I feel like that's a little harsh. Like, the lasers could have easily cut him in half, and he is only a child, despite the fact that he's super powerful. He's still only a kid, and I just thought that was a little aggressive to be trying to cut him in half. But this makes him go extremely angry, and he basically he just really unleashes havoc, and he just explodes. And like I said, the animation in this series is phenomenal. You can tell that this anime has a lot of budget behind it. You can tell Marvel and Disney did not waste they did not waste any money with this one. They really put their money where their mouth is, and you can tell just by the animation, the special effects, the CGI, and even the choreography, the fight scenes. There's a lot of gravity in all of these fight scenes, and you can really tell. And so he actually explodes, which ends up making the team it ends up forcing the team to recruit back to their ship, and they try to escape. But of course they're not able to, because he's too powerful, and he actually uses his magic to sort of magically grab a hold to the ship so that they can't escape. And then then the team ends up getting saved by a character that I simply did not see coming. Complete surprise by me, and actually quite mind-blowing. It was a really cool entrance, and of course it is Thor, the God of Thunder, Odin's son, and he comes and saves the day. And thankfully they give us a Thor that we actually like. It's not the party Thor, the crazy happy-go-lucky Thor. This is a very serious, very powerful Thor, which is the way Thor needs to be, really. I kind of miss that about Thor. My favorite two Thor movies were the original Thor, and then of course Thor Ragnarok, just because in Ragnarok was probably the most powerful that we've ever seen Thor, but he was still for the most part very serious. Even though he was comedic and it was a little laid back, he wasn't as comedic as what he was in Love and Thunder. He wasn't as comedic as what he was sort of in in the Avengers Endgame. Not so much Infinity War. He was pretty serious in Infinity War, but Endgame he was more of a joke. And then, of course, in Love and Thunder, he was too jokey. I really missed that serious, powerful Thor from the original movies. And then, of course, Thor Ragnarok. Now, I was actually a fan of Thor: The Dark World as well, but I know that a lot of people were not. So when Thor came in this episode, it was really nice to see him actually be powerful and to be very serious. He's not this jokey kind of like frat boy. He's very serious. He is absolutely the god of thunder here. He is extremely powerful and he is a force to be reckoned with. And so he comes and saves the day, and then they end up taking the kid and they lock him up inside of a cell. And while the kid is locked in the cell, they end up finding this thing, which we know from watching Guardians of the Galaxy 2, that this is actually like a seed, I think they call it, which from Ego, the living planet, and this is sort of how he takes over worlds and consumes worlds and whatnot. He sort of leaves these little seedlings, and this is the whole reason why Peter was here to begin with. He came here to bring these seeds, to plant them on Earth so that Ego would eventually be able to take it over, and uses it by using its power. I can't quite remember how it works, but either way, Ego's connected to it, and this is how he uses these types of little seedlings to take over the worlds. And in this episode, he actually calls it expansion or expanding, and I think they call it that in the Guardians of the Galaxy 2 as well. Except in this version, he was hoping that Peter was going to help him, but of course. So Thor explains this to the team. He explains everything about Ego and about Ego seeds, and he tells them how Ego is very likely going to end up coming to the planet, to finish the job. Now, in the meantime, I absolutely love this dynamic between Peter and Hope, because she ends up connecting with him. She's there using, she's using the headphones, listening to music same way that he did in the original Guardians of the Galaxy. And I actually thought that was a pretty cool callback to the original movie, because even though she's doing it, and this is in the 80s, and Peter Quill is only a child, I did think it was really cool that she came into the room dancing and singing the exact same way that the very first Guardians of the Galaxy movie was when we're first introduced to Peter Quill. So that was really cool to see that, she's doing exactly what Star-Lord did in our universe when they first meet. And then they have this really cool moment. Like I said, I absolutely love their chemistry on screen. The voiceovers, the actors who did the voiceovers did a great job playing off of each other. And the animation style just looks absolutely amazing. They really have a cool connection scene. They both have lost their mothers. They both love the music. They both love the headset. So it was really cool to see that. And I really loved how they played off of each other. And I think Marvel did a phenomenal job with this episode, at least with that part of the episode, their dynamic and the way that they played off of each other. And also it was really cool to see how they connected, because this also really helps Peter sort of turn a leaf a little bit. He's not so angry. He's not quite so apocalyptic now, because he connects with Hope, which means he connects with his own humanity, because he is part human too. So it was really cool to see that, and it was really nice, and it was really appropriate. And so in the meantime, Ego is trying to reach his son and sort of try to figure out what's going on Earth, to figure out if Peter is in trouble, or if he's, if there's anything going wrong. Did he pass the mission? Did he fail the mission? Ego really doesn't know what's happening. So, back in the room with the team, where the team is, this seedling thing that Thor was explaining, talking about earlier, it starts to glow, which means Ego, of course, is now on his way. And so while they're here looking at this, they end up getting sort of like an alert on their stations, telling them that there is another spacecraft coming into the orbit, and of course this is Ego. And so then we come to the scene where it seems like Ego lands in some part of the desert and whatnot, which I would assume is probably close to Las Vegas, but I don't really know that, because Quill obviously is in New York somewhere, which makes me think that Ego probably was close by somewhere, or somewhere in the United States. And I think, at least from my knowledge as a Canadian, the only spot that I can really think of off the top of my head that's kind of deserty down in the States would be Las Vegas. So I'm assuming he landed somewhere around there. But when we're first introduced to Ego here on Earth, it looks so cool because all the rocks are coming up. It's almost like it's anti-gravity. And this animation in particular, this episode, has a lot of Dragon Ball Z vibes, which I absolutely love. Dragon Ball Z was my favorite anime of all time. So it was really nice to see Marvel utilize that aspect. Like I said, the animation is very smooth, it's very crisp, it's not choppy. The lighting worked, the dust worked, the special effects works. And I just thought he looked so intimidating. here, and he looked really, really cool. And of course, with Ego arriving, this causes basically an all-out war against the team. As you can see, we have Thor and Black Panther and a gigantic man, or Goliath, here, and they're about to fight an entire army of egos, because he creates all these all these versions of himself by sort of using the sand, I believe it is. Like, he's able to manipulate the sand and make the sand become different versions of himself. It's almost like he can create an army of people made out of the sand. So I guess in some ways you could say it's like they're fighting a whole bunch of Sandmans, but it was really cool. Lots of great action, especially with Gigantic, or Mr. Goliath, Gigantic Man. You get to see him, the way they used his powers in this fight was really cool, and Thor was really, really cool in this fight as well. And they really did not hold back with Thor in this episode, which is a good thing. That's what we needed. We need a Thor who is very powerful and very intimidating. I think that's one thing that we have been lacking in the MCU, was Thor, really, showing off his powers, but they don't hold back in this one. He really shows his powers. Now, in the meantime, we have Peter Quill, and he's going to visit his mother's grave, and I believe they have it's Hank Pym that's with him, and also the original Marvel. Captain Marvel is there as well, and of course the Winter Soldier is here, and the Winter Soldier has Peter Quill in his sights. He is basically being a sniper. And I guess the idea is that he's just not allowed to let him escape his sights, just in case he does turn. I guess right now he's, Peter's sort of in limbo, and the team don't really know what he's going to do. Is he going to remain good? Is he going to turn again and become evil? Is he going to end up helping Ego, or is he going to help the heroes on Earth? So right now they're sort of in limbo, so I'm assuming that this is why the Winter Soldier has him in his sights. It's really just for a precautionary reason. It's not because Winter Soldier literally wants to kill him. It's just because they're a little bit nervous of what he might do if they just sort of let him go off free roaming. So once they leave here, and they leave the cemetery, or this place, then he ends up going with Hank Pym, and they ends up jumping out of this helicarrier that typically the SHIELD agents and all of our heroes oftentimes use. Even in the Avengers movies, they oftentimes ride around in these helicarriers. And so Ant-Man and Peter Quill jumps out, and we get some really cool shots here too with Ant-Man's power. And so they end up shrinking down to the size of an ant, and they literally start using an ant. And then he ends up using his powers again, and they become really big. And Peter Quill is able to grab the seed. Remember the seedling, which is inside of this bottle. They ends up grabbing it, and which I guess Peter is able to utilize this seed as well. So, for his own benefit, because he is the offspring of Ego. So I guess if Ego can do it, then so can Peter Quill. And they end up going and flying into this massive statue type building type thing that Ego has placed himself inside of. And Peter Quill just uses the energy, or this power, from the seed, and he uses it for himself, and he just unleashes havoc. And as you can see here, it basically looks like a Kamehameha wave from Dragon Ball Z. Looks literally just like what Goku would do. And so I absolutely love this animation. It was so intense, and this Kamehameha wave actually gets so much bigger, but I didn't put that as the screenshot because I didn't want to fully spoil it for you. It's really worth your while to, at the very least, watch this scene when Peter Quill just loses loses it and just goes all out. I'd be very curious to see if he could become this powerful in the original MCU timeline, in the timeline that we've been following from the beginning, in the Universe 616. I would love to see him be able to unleash this kind of power in real live action. And as far as I know, Star-Lord is going to be continuing on, so it would be really cool if they actually did do this. And I wonder if this could be sort of like a prelude where we actually are going to see this in the future. And so I really hope we do. But it looks absolutely amazing here in the animation, and by doing this wave, he ends up beating Ego, and then we get a really nice scene here between Peter and Hank. And Hank basically, literally, sort of congratulates him and tells him that it's going to be okay, and literally takes him in, which is pretty well where the episode actually ends. And it ends with them taking in Peter Quill into their family, and they give him a cat. And so I guess from here on out, I guess that he will grow up with hope and they'll become more like brother and sister. They'll become very good friends, and I'm assuming Hank will just watch over them, and I'm sure people like Captain Marvel will help, help him learn the ways of the earth, and probably also monitor him as well, just to be safe, because she does deal with the otherworldly threats. She is a Kree starship pilot or whatever it was. I believe they say about her in the beginning of the episode and whatnot. But either way, it was just a beautiful ending to a really cool story with some great action sequences and some really intense sequences, and it was really cool. I thought this was a really cool what if episode. What if Peter Quill turned evil? The only nitpick that I would have with this episode is that I wish that they had it where maybe they show him get abducted in 1988, but then have it so that he comes back when he was already an adult. I think it would have been a lot cool and a lot more intimidating if he was actually already grown into a man, as opposed to just having him as a child. But it was still cool to see all in all. And that's pretty well how this episode ends and whatnot. And so overall, my overall thoughts of the episode was I absolutely loved the animation. I would not have changed any of the fight sequences whatsoever. I did feel like the sort of the change of heart that Peter has, I did think that was a little bit sudden, a little bit rushed. I feel like we could have used an extra 5 or 10 minutes to the episode just to see that sort of that full-blown turn, how he just goes from absolute destroying the world to all of a sudden now he's just going to randomly help these strangers by realizing that Ego maybe was more evil than anything. I just felt like that switch was a little bit too quick, but beyond that I still thought the story was great, and I really loved seeing all the characters. I loved seeing the introduction of Gigantic Man, or Goliath. I'd love to see him over in the live action, and it was also really cool to see Hank Pym get an opportunity to actually have an episode to be a hero in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it was just so much fun seeing all these heroes come together, including Peter Quill. It was great to see Kurt Russell, I believe, who voices Ego. He was actually Ego in the Guardians of the Galaxy as well, so it was really cool to have all of our favorite actors come back and voice their animated counterparts. And all in all, I just had a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed episode 2 of What If. So let me know in the comment section below if you've seen it, and if you liked it, tell me why or why not. If you liked this video, click that subscribe button and leave a like, help the algorithm, and definitely let me know your thoughts. I love having a conversation with you guys in the comments, and that's pretty well all I got. So until the next video, take care.